imagine working, I don't know, 80 hours a week for a company.
Oh, wow. That sounds awful.
Yeah, right? You never take a vacation. You sacrifice your physical health.
Mm-hmm.
You alienate your closest friends, and you give, like, every single ounce of your energy to this corporate vision.
Just burning yourself out entirely.
Precisely. Then, after decades of this really intense labor, you find out you have been working for a rival corporation.
Wait, what?
Yeah, a rival that is actively trying to destroy the very cause you thought you were building.
Oh, man. That is just brutal.
It really is. And that is the psychological and spiritual trap we are analyzing today on Reformed Thinking. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
So today's deep dive has a really specific mission. We want to lay out this objective for you, the listener.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at an 1886 text.
A fairly old one, yeah.
Right. It's a sermon by Charles Spurgeon called Zealous but Wrong. And it is based on the biblical text of Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 3.
Which is such a fascinating passage.
It is. Our goal here is to unpack the anatomy of misguided religious enthusiasm. We really want to dissect this subtle trap of self-righteousness.
Yeah, and we need to be clear about the specific demographic we are looking at today.
Go ahead.
Spurgeon is not addressing, the irreligious. He isn't talking about the skeptic or the secularist or someone who has just abandoned all moral frameworks entirely.
Right, the usual suspects.
Yeah, he is looking at individuals who are intensely religious. They're highly motivated, but they're entirely missing the mark.
They're doing all the right things on the outside, basically.
Spot on. The outside looks great, but their internal machinery is completely misaligned. They are running a race with intense dedication, but they are running in the wrong direction entirely.
Which connects right back to that Romans text.
Right. Romans 10 gives us the perfect lens to examine this. We are looking at a group of people who possess a zeal for God, but it is not according to knowledge.
So they have the fire, but no light.
Yeah. They are ignorant of God's provided righteousness, so they just go about trying to establish their own. It is a really devastating critique of moral effort that is, divorced from grace.
It makes me think about you, the listener. If you have ever felt completely exhausted trying to maintain a flawless moral record, this deep dive is for you.
Or if you know someone whose religious intensity feels more like a weapon than a comfort.
Oh, yeah. We all know someone like that.
The hardest person to wake up is the person who is dreaming that they are already awake.
Wow. That is a heavy thought to start with. But before we can analyze the mechanics of that wrong kind of zeal, we first need to look at the author's proposed response to it.
Right, which he draws directly from the life of the Apostle Paul.
The historical context here is just wild when you stop and think about it. I mean, Paul was relentlessly hunted by his own people.
He really was.
He was mobbed in the streets. They dragged him before city magistrates. He was stoned and left for dead.
Beaten with rods, too.
Yeah, beaten with rods. Just constant violent opposition. And yet, his response in Romans chapter 10 is this intense desire and prayer for their salvation.
It makes no sense from a human perspective.
Not at all. Spurgeon argues that in proportion to an enemy's malice, a Christian's desire for their good should actually increase.
Which is such a radical shift in
I
thinking.
was trying to come up with an analogy for this.
Yeah.
It is like a whistleblower being viciously attacked by the executives of the very company they are trying to rescue.
Oh, that is a good way to frame it.
Right, so the executives are dragging this person's name through the mud. They're destroying their career, ruining their whole life.
Yeah, full character assassination.
And instead of suing them or going to the press to destroy them in return, the whistleblower genuinely prays for their success and well-being.
It is completely counterintuitive to our modern sense of justice.
It totally bypasses our basic human instinct for self-preservation.
It bypasses self-preservation because it requires a radical shift in how you view humanity. What is so fascinating here is how Spurgeon takes this historical reality of Paul's life and distills it into a practical rule for everyday living.
How so?
Well, he suggests that whenever you see a public sin, whenever you hear someone swear in the street or read about an offense in the news, you should immediately pray for that person's salvation.
Wait, immediately? Just like that?
Yeah, instantly. Because, we are naturally wired for judgment.
Oh, definitely.
When we see someone fail morally, especially in a public way, our default setting is to elevate ourselves by condemning them. We act as judge and jury to validate our own
We
standing.
want to feel better about ourselves, basically.
Right. But Spurgeon's rule demands that we shift from judgment to pity. It requires us to view the offender not as a target for our righteous indignation, but as a captive who needs rescuing.
So when Paul was being stoned, he didn't see his attackers as monsters to be destroyed.
No, he saw them as blind men stumbling in the dark. He saw them acting out of a misguided zeal. His desire for their salvation outweighed his desire for his own safety, or his vindication.
That is incredible. He understood that their malice was just a symptom of their spiritual blindness.
Yeah, so he prayed for them.
Okay, so that transitions us from the reaction to the reasons. Why are these intensely religious, zealous people the specific target for such intense prayer?
Spurgeon gives 4 specific reasons why this demographic demands our attention.
Let's dig into the first one.
So the first reason is that zeal is rare.
Rare, even back then.
Yeah. He uses this brilliant imagery describing the religious climate of his day as feeling like a thick autumn fog.
A thick autumn fog. I love that description.
Right. He says people are enthusiastic about politics or art or fashion, but finding a person with actual fire and heart in matters of faith is interesting to him. It catches his eye.
So they stand out. What is the second reason?
Second, he notes that they do massive damage. A mistaken zealot is like a madman with a firebrand.
A madman with a firebrand. That paints quite a picture.
Yeah. He cites examples like the Pharisees crucifying Christ or Saul dragging people to prison. He even mentions landlords of his own era evicting tenants for going to a different church.
Wow.
They all believe they are doing God a favor by exterminating error.
So the zeal itself becomes a weapon.
Precisely. Third, he says they make incredible advocates if corrected.
Oh, that makes sense. Because they already have the energy.
Yeah, if all that energy spent on rites, mortifications, and rule following were redirected to grace, they would be a lightning flash across the world.
A lightning flash. The imagery here is so good. And the fourth reason.
Fourth, they are incredibly difficult to reach. Self-righteousness sticks to a person like skin to flesh.
Like skin to flesh. That sounds painful to pull away. But I have to pose a pushback question here about that zeal. Is enthusiasm always an asset?
I mean, no.
Right. I look at the analogy from the text. If you want to go to York, riding a horse at breakneck speed south will not get you there.
You'll be going fast, but totally the wrong way.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. You will just kill 1,000 horses and never see the city gates. Speed without direction is fatal.
It is not just fatal to the rider, though. It destroys everything in its path. Enthusiasm, devoid of truth, is actively destructive.
So how do you reach them then?
Well, if we look at the psychology of pride mentioned in that fourth point, it becomes clear why these individuals are so difficult to reach. It is significantly easier to pull an obvious rule breaker out of their vice than to convince a good person that their goodness is flawed.
Oh, that is a really crucial point. Let's unpack that.
Think about the obvious rule breaker, the addict, the thief, the public scandal maker. They have no illusions about their moral standing. They know they are in a ditch.
Right. You don't have to convince them they messed up.
Yeah. But the self-righteous person has built their entire identity on their moral performance. Their pride is entirely wrapped up in their perceived goodness.
So when you tell them they need grace,
When you tell a self-righteous person that their best efforts are insufficient, you are not just critiquing their actions, you are dismantling their entire sense of self.
you were telling them their whole 80-hour work week was for the rival company.
Spot on. Spurgeon notes that pulling someone out of the ditch of self-righteousness is one of the most difficult tasks imaginable because they believe they are standing on the peak of a mountain.
To them, grace feels like an insult, doesn't it?
It does. It implies they need charity, and their ego cannot tolerate the idea of spiritual bankruptcy.
Okay, so if these people are so dedicated, if they read their Bibles and go to church, how do they get it so wrong?
That is the million-dollar question.
If they are reading the same texts, how do they miss the central point so completely? There seems to be a massive blind spot here.
The text points to a root cause. It describes a specific fourfold ignorance.
4 layers of ignorance. Let's walk through those. What is the first one?
The first layer is an ignorance of God's character. They think God's standard is the same as human pride.
Meaning they think God is just like a slightly better version of a good human.
Right. They grade on a curve.
Okay, what is the second layer?
The second layer is an ignorance of the law. They read the Ten Commandments but miss the internal gauge entirely.
The internal gauge, like what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, where Jesus taught that anger is murder and a lustful look is adultery. Expecting to perfectly keep the law is like trying to hold the sun in the hollow of your hand.
Trying to hold the sun in your hand. You would just burn up instantly.
Yeah. The third layer is an ignorance of the heart's requirement. God wants truth in the hidden parts.
So it's not just about what your hands are doing.
No. Even if your hands do not steal, having a heart that wants to steal is a failure. Spurgeon even mentions that idle silence can be a sin.
Idle silence. Wow. Just doing nothing when you should speak up.
Yeah. And the fourth layer is an ignorance of the substitute. They completely miss the fact that God provided a perfect righteousness through Jesus.
Okay, but listening to all of this, you really have to wonder if the standard is simply rigged against humanity.
It can definitely feel that way.
I mean, trying to offer your own good deeds to God is like a person with $1 billion debt, trying to pay it off with a jar of tarnished pennies.
Such a great analogy.
Not only does it fail to clear the debt, but you are handing it to a billionaire benefactor who already cleared the account for you. It is borderline insulting.
It is entirely insulting, and that is why Spurgeon uses such intense language here. He states that offering your own righteousness is a superfluity of naughtiness.
A superfluity of naughtiness. Only Spurgeon could come up with a phrase like that. What does he mean by it?
He argues that if humanity could save itself through moral effort, it would make the tragedy of Calvary a needless extravagance.
Oh, I see.
If you can earn your way, then the cross was a mistake. To set up your own goodness is to act as a rival to Christ.
You are basically saying, I don't need your help.
Yeah, you are essentially holding up your own resume and saying, this is sufficient. I do not need the provided substitute.
That brings us back to that second layer of ignorance, the ignorance of the law.
Let's look closely at the mechanics of that. The self-righteous person views the law as a checklist of external behaviors. They say, I have not killed anyone, I have not stolen anything, therefore I am righteous.
It's very performance-based.
Right. But the law was never designed to just monitor your hands. It was designed to expose your heart.
Expose the heart.
Yeah. When you recognize that the standard is absolute perfection, not just in deed, but in thought, in motive, in desire, you realize that attempting to fulfill it is indeed like trying to hold the sun in your hand.
You will only be consumed by it.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. The law functions as a mirror to show you your dirt, not as a sponge to clean your face.
Wait, hold on. You just mentioned that they ignore the perfect substitute, and we're talking about this idea of a provided righteousness. What does that actually look like mechanically?
That is a great question.
Because terms like imputed righteousness get thrown around a lot in theological circles.
They do, and people often misunderstand them.
Are we talking about an accounting trick where God just moves numbers on a spreadsheet? Because if the internal standard is that high where even a thought is a violation, how does someone else's perfect record actually become mine in a way that satisfies that impossible standard?
That is the core issue here. Imputed righteousness is not a legal fiction or a simple spreadsheet trick. Think of it as a legally binding union.
A union, like a marriage.
Yeah, a marriage is a perfect way to think about it. In financial terms, if you marry someone with massive debt, their debt becomes your debt.
Unfortunately, yes.
But on the flip side, if you are entirely bankrupt and you marry a billionaire, their wealth becomes your wealth.
Okay, I'm tracking with you.
So in this theological framework, Christ willingly takes on the massive debt of the individual. All the failure to meet the standard, the internal corruption, the broken law, he pays it in full.
And what does the individual get in exchange?
In exchange, his perfect record, a life, lived with absolute flawless adherence to God's standard in thought, word, and deed, is legally credited to the individual. Wow, so they get the billionaire's wealth.
Yeah. When God looks at the person, he does not see the tarnished pennies. He sees the perfect record of the substitute.
But the self-righteous person is ignorant of this transaction, totally ignorant. They're trying to build their own wealth one tarnished penny at a time, completely unaware that the marriage has already been offered.
The debt has already been paid.
And the infinite wealth is already available. They prefer their proud poverty to a humbling rescue.
Because they reject that rescue, they are forced to build their own shelter. And that brings us to the next section.
The exhausting, never-ending labor of trying to save yourself.
Yeah. Spurgeon describes this as building a stuffed statue that keeps toppling over. Let's think about the physics of that for a second.
It's a great metaphor.
You sew the fabric together, you stuff it with whatever material you can find, and you prop it up. But because it lacks an internal skeleton, The moment the wind blows, it falls.
Right. The external behavior modification is not enough to hold it up.
Or he uses the analogy of building a wall with bad mortar. When it falls, the person just tries to wedge another rock in to stabilize it.
Always patching, never fixing.
Exactly. And the text outlines a very specific progression of self-salvation. It's like a psychological progression.
Yeah, let's walk through those steps.
First, the person tries to be purely moral until their conscience points out their inevitable failures.
Which it always does.
Then they shift to religious rituals. They need something measurable to soothe the anxiety of their failure.
Yeah, that is why they start praying longer on a timer, or reading a set number of chapters a day, or taking sacraments with intense regularity.
It is an anxiety management tool.
That is a great way to put it.
But when that fails to provide peace, especially as death approaches, they move to the third step. They make grand gestures.
Right, they build bridges, endow hospitals, or pay for stained glass windows.
Trying to leave a legacy to buy their way in. And finally, it often devolves into extreme sectarianism, where they believe every single practice of their specific church is infallible.
It becomes incredibly rigid.
But there's a deeply subtle trap here that I find fascinating, and I really want to push back on this. It is the trap of trusting in your own feelings.
Oh, the feeling crap, yes.
Someone might say, I know works will not save me, but I groan so heavily under my guilt, surely that counts.
Right.
So I have to ask you, can feeling guilty actually become a toxic form of self-righteousness?
It absolutely can, and this is perhaps the most deceptive trap of all. Relying on one's own sense of guilt is just another form of works.
How so? Because guilt feels like the opposite of pride.
It feels that way, but the logic goes like this. I cannot offer God a perfect life, so I will offer him my intense misery over my imperfect life.
Oh, wow. So the misery becomes the currency.
Yeah. We start to believe that our self-loathing has a toning value. We think that if we punish ourselves enough mentally, we can balance the scales.
That is so twisted, but so common.
But anything that comes from the person, whether it is thoughts, feelings, actions, or even tears of regret, spoils the equation if it is relied upon for standing before God.
So you can't even trust your own repentance.
No, you cannot trust in your repentance any more than you can trust in your obedience. Both are flawed. Both are stained with selfish motives.
If you add your guilt to the foundation as a way of earning favor, what happens?
You have created what Spurgeon calls Christ and company. That is an impossible partnership.
Christ and company. I love that. God doesn't share the credit.
Right. The saving work must be done entirely by the Savior. The individual acts out their gratitude in daily life, but the foundation remains entirely outside of themselves. Guilt is meant to drive you to the substitute, not become a substitute itself.
That is a staggering thought, that even our guilt can become a tool for human pride. We use our own misery to avoid submitting to grace.
It's a refusal to let go of control.
Which brings us to the next point. Why does this exhausting cycle continue? Why do people stay on this treadmill when it clearly does not work?
The text highlights 3 specific things the self-righteous will absolutely refuse to do.
They stubbornly refuse to yield was the first one.
First, they refuse to hear the truth. They are prejudiced against grace. They think grace is for the commonality and not for upstanding, respectable people.
A commonality. That's a very classist way of looking at it.
Yeah. There is an amazing anecdote included here about a man who found Martin Luther's commentary on Galatians in a discount book bin for 6 pence.
I remember reading that.
He calls it 6 penny worth of salvation against a world of dumb dogs.
Pretty blunt way to put it. What is the second refusal?
Second, they refuse to admit their need. They will not get on their knees, plead guilty, or put a rope around their neck as a condemned criminal.
They won't surrender. And the third?
Third, they refuse to submit to the Spirit of grace. They want to pay for their standing.
Which goes back to the debt analogy.
Yeah. Grace dictates that if you are forgiven for nothing, you belong to God forever and must live a holy life out of sheer love, not to earn points.
It is exactly like a drowning aristocrat who refuses a life preserver because it was tossed by a common sailor.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah. They would rather drown with dignity than be saved by charity. The sheer stubbornness of the human ego is mind-blowing.
The ego demands control. The refusal to submit is entirely about maintaining autonomy over one's own fate.
So if I earn my salvation through my morality, my rituals, or even my intense guilt, I retain my power.
Yes. You can negotiate with God. You can say, look at what I have done, you owe me.
Look at all the bad mortar I put in the wall, pay me.
Right. But if I accept salvation as a free gift, I am entirely at his mercy. I am a dependent.
That is terrifying for a proud person.
It is. This raises a crucial distinction between the demands of the law and the provision of grace.
Let's dig into that distinction.
Well, the law demands action, but it provides no ability to perform that action. It points out the flaws in the stuffed statue, but it offers no internal skeleton to hold it up.
Okay, and what does grace do?
Grace, on the other hand, provides a new mainspring inside the human heart.
A new mainspring. Let's use an analogy for that.
Think of a clock that is constantly telling the wrong time. You can manually adjust the hands every 5 minutes, which is exhausting, frustrating, and ultimately, well, in the end, it's futile.
That manual adjustment is self-righteousness.
Yeah. Or you can replace the mainspring. Grace replaces the internal machinery.
So the hands begin to move correctly, not because they're being forced from the outside by sheer willpower.
But because the internal mechanism has been entirely replaced, the motivation for behavior completely changes.
That new mainspring concept is the key to understanding the difference between healthy zeal and the destructive zeal we've been talking about today.
It really is.
When the self-righteous person is performing all those rituals, setting the timer to pray, forcing themselves to read their chapters, they are manually pushing the hands of the broken clock.
And their fingers are getting tired.
Yeah. They're exhausted, frustrated, and judging everyone else whose clock is also broken.
Mm-hmm.
But when that mainspring is replaced, the entire motivation shifts. You are no longer acting out of fear of punishment or a frantic desire for a reward.
You are acting out of an overwhelming sense of gratitude.
The pressure is off. You do not have to keep the stuffed statue propped up anymore. You do not have to keep patching the wall with bad mortar.
The energy of your life is no longer spent trying to prove you are worthy of love. It is spent responding to the fact that you are already loved despite your unworthiness.
Precisely. And this is why Spurgeon is so insistent on praying for these people, as we discussed at the beginning of the show.
He knows the immense, crushing burden they are carrying.
They're carrying the weight of their own salvation, a weight the human frame was never designed to bear.
The tragedy is that this burden is entirely self-imposed. God is holding out a perfect righteousness, and they are rejecting it in favor of their own flawed efforts.
It is tragic to watch.
When we look at the progression from morality to rituals to grand gestures, we are watching a soul desperately trying to find peace and constantly coming up empty.
Yeah, that progression we talked about earlier.
And the tragedy of sectarianism, for instance, where someone believes only their specific group has the truth. That is just a desperate attempt to find absolute certainty in a system they've built themselves.
A psychological fortress constructed to keep the reality of their own failure out.
Spot on.
I want to go back to the first point about their refusal to hear it. The prejudice against grace. The idea that grace is for the commonality is so telling to me.
Oh, it really exposes the classism inherent in self-righteousness.
Right. The upstanding citizen looks at the criminal who repents on their deathbed and feels a sense of, massive injustice.
They think, I worked hard my whole life to be a good person. I paid my taxes, I followed the rules, and they get in for free at the last minute.
It totally mirrors the parable of the workers in the vineyard. The people who worked all day in the hot sun were furious that the people who worked 1 hour got the exact same pay.
Yeah, the human ego hates grace.
But the reality is, everyone needs the exact same grace. Because compared to the absolute holiness of God, the difference between the upstanding citizen and the career criminal is microscopic.
That microscopic difference is the massive blind spot we talked about earlier. And this brings us back to their ignorance of God's character.
How does it connect?
If you view God as just slightly better than the best human, then your own goodness seems impressive. You can look down on the criminal because you are comparing yourself to a horizontal standard.
Looking left and right instead of up.
Yeah. But if you view God as infinitely holy, as burning against all injustice, all untruth, all hidden malice, then your goodness looks like rags.
Which is why they refuse to put the rope around their neck.
Yes. The refusal to admit need, the refusal to put the rope around one's neck as a condemned criminal is a failure of perspective. It is a failure to see reality as it actually is.
Unlike the man who found the book.
Right. The man who found Luther's commentary on Galatians found reality. He found the truth that all human effort is bankrupt and that salvation must come entirely from outside.
The 6 pennyworth of salvation is worth infinitely more than a lifetime of self-generated morality.
Let's talk more about that third layer of ignorance, the ignorance of the heart's requirement.
Okay.
You mentioned the phrase idle silence earlier, and that really caught my attention. We generally think of sin as an action, doing something wrong, crossing a line.
Right. Act of rebellion.
But Spurgeon points out that even our inaction, our silence when we should speak up for the truth, our lack of love when we should be compassionate, is a failure to meet the standard.
It is the internal gauge that condemns us all.
Yeah. If the standard requires truth in the inward parts, then nobody passes the test. That is why the substitute is absolutely necessary. It completely shatters the illusion that we can manage our own spiritual portfolios.
The internal gauge dismantles the self-righteous argument entirely.
Totally dismantles it.
When you realize that you can commit murder with a thought of bitter hatred or adultery with a fleeting glance, the entire facade of moral perfection collapses. You cannot hide behind your external behavior anymore.
Which is why the doctrine of imputed righteousness we discussed is the only logical solution to the human condition.
The only way out.
God does not just overlook our flaws or lower the standard to accommodate our weakness. He provides a perfect record.
The billionaire pays the debt.
Yeah. Christ lived the life we could not live and died the death we deserve to die. When you grasp that, the need to establish your own righteousness vanishes completely.
You no longer have to pay for your standing.
Right. You belong to God, and out of that belonging flows a life of love, gratitude, and sincere obedience. The zeal is no longer frantic. It is focused.
Well, to bring all these threads together for you, the listener, we have really tried to dig into the intense danger of misplaced religious energy today.
It is a trap that is so easy to fall into.
We have looked at the futility of building a moral resume for God, trying to prop up a statue that keeps falling over because it lacks an internal skeleton. We have seen how even our guilt can become a twisted form of self-reliance, an attempt to pay off $1 billion debt with tarnished pennies.
Just handing over the pennies and expecting praise.
Yeah. And we have highlighted the absolute necessity of trading in those pennies for the provided righteousness of Christ. The zeal is there, but without the knowledge of grace, it is just a frantic race in the wrong direction.
Exhausting the rider and destroying the horse.
As we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with a lingering thought that builds directly on this concept of the new mainspring.
Yeah, let's leave him with something to chew on.
We have talked about the sheer exhaustion of trying to manually push the hands of the clock. We have talked about how human effort cannot reach the divine standard, and how even our guilt over failing is a flawed currency.
It is exhausting just thinking about it.
So I want to ask you, what does it actually look like to stop trying to save yourself for just one day?
Just one day.
If the heavy lifting has already been done, if the debt is entirely cleared by a willing substitute, what would happen if you just stopped working to earn your standing?
What a question.
What if the heaviest burden you carry is the one you were never asked to pick up?